So on the first one, we can have either the government or the private sector paying for the abatement. On the second dimension, the residual damages from pollution, the damages from the unabated pollution, we have either society bears those costs or the private sector bears those costs. So if we take then dimension 3, the extent of private discretion, and cross it with dimension 4, then what we get is a kind of a policy instrument space. And the thing to recognize is, just as discretion is not an either-or, private sector or government, the bearing of costs is not either-or. So if you look at this diagram, think about the most common policy instruments. Let's take an environmental fee. Where would an environmental fee be in here? Well, it's one that gives lots of discretion to private parties. They can reduce their pollution, and then they pay for whatever remaining pollution. That would put them down in the lower left corner, where they're paying for the abatement costs. They're paying, the fee pays for the residual costs. They're, in a sense, reimbursing or paying society for the costs of their remaining pollution. But they have a lot of discretion regarding how they make their reductions. Or consider the possibility of a subsidy for emissions reduction. We'll pay you to reduce your emissions. That would be up in the upper right corner, because the government is essentially making a payment to the private sector to make emissions reductions, and then saying, but don't worry about the stuff you don't abate, because you actually have the right to do that. Society bears the cost of those damages. Now notice that both of these have a high degree of private discretion. We're holding businesses responsible for the outcome of their decisions, not for how they decide or what technologies they use. But we can also imagine an instrument in which the government makes all of the decisions. The government controls and pays for environmental protection. Think of a publicly owned treatment work, right? A sewage treatment plant owned by the government. The government runs the treatment plant. It pays for the treatment plant. So that would be in the upper right-hand corner. Now, what this says is that we can fill in this space with our policy instruments and start to get a sense of the relation among things. Now, these instruments are just the most recognizable instruments. The arrows tell you that there's actually any number of policy arrangements, or policy instrument arrangements in between these highly recognizable instruments. So, for example, under command and control, we say, you must do this. You don't have discretion. You must do this. But you don't have to worry about any remaining emissions or any remaining environmental damage after you've taken that action. With marketable allowances, which economists favor because they give lots of discretion for innovation by private parties, if we grandfather the marketable allowances, we're essentially saying you can emit this much for free, but you have to pay to reduce to get to that point. So we have the private parties paying for the abatement cost and the society bearing the cost of the residual pollution. Now you might have noticed this evil-looking character down in the lower right-hand corner. This is one where the government says, here's what you're going to do, and by the way, you're also going to pay for anything you don't abate. So we're going to tell you how much to abate, and then we're going to charge you for what you don't abate. Now, I've never actually observed this instrument in practice, and I suggest that it's so evil that we don't even give it a name. I can't find a name for that policy instrument. Now, let's think about how this might work out in our plastic bag example. Here from San Francisco, we see two different policy instruments at work. Down at the lower part, no more plastic bags. They're banned. You cannot use them. And by the way, there's a price floor on compostable and recyclable bags. So compostable plastic bags and recyclable paper bags, there's a price floor. It has to be charged by the retailer for those items. In the Philippines, in Quezon City, they have not only a fee for plastic bags, but they have a subsidy for bringing your own bag, as well as favorable treatment at the checkout counter. So there's another set of policy instruments. This is Singapore's own work that was in place for several years on this front to apply a fee to plastic bags. Here's an alternative to this post-consumer cleanup, right? Just go ahead and throw the plastic bags. The government will provide the service of cleaning up the litter from the environment. Or the government will provide checkpoints or pickup points for recycling plastic bags. So this is the government production instrument. Or my favorite, which I've never actually seen in practice, would be subsidies for alternatives to plastic bags. That is, we'll pay you to buy something to use in place of plastic bags. This is my wife's shopping cart. But the point is that there's a wide range of these policy instruments, and by recognizing this and recognizing the arrangements or the relation among these instruments, we can start to imagine a little more creatively what our alternatives are. Now, I've now gone through the first 4 dimensions of this taxonomy. That is, what is the root problem? What is the fundamental role of government? Who gets to decide how the environmental protection will be delivered, and who's going to pay for it? Now, the next set of dimensions are actually quite specific. So we move from policy instrument choice to policy design. And I'm going to just run through these very quickly. But now we're talking about dimensions that are very specific to these externality instruments. So for example, you might have noticed that on this left-hand side, we have policy instruments in pairs: subsidies and procurement, taxes and allowances. What these are two different ways of approaching that region of the policy space. And they're basically price-based versus quantity-based. So the subsidies and the taxes are price-based. This many dollars per unit of activity. The quantity-based is one in which the government says, this is how much of the activity we want to see. And then the market takes over from there. So we have to decide, we still have to decide whether we're going to use quantity or prices. Another issue is where are we going to apply the policy instruments? So we often think, well, what we're going to do is we're going to just work on the consumers. But in fact, there's lots of points along the supply chain where we can apply policy instruments. We have to decide where on the supply chain to apply those. So for example, in our plastic bag example, we might go for post-consumer pressure. That is, trying to fine anyone who litters, encourage them to recycle, for example. Or we might apply the pressure on the retailers. We might say, you have to charge a fee for delivering those plastic bags, or giving away those plastic bags. Or you're banned from delivering those plastic bags. So we could apply it there. But what this says is we could even go further upstream. We could apply it on the shipping companies, a fee on imports, or a limit to imports of plastic bags. Or if the refiners and manufacturers are under our jurisdiction, we could even regulate the kinds of materials they put in plastic bags, and so on. So we have to also decide where in the supply chain we're going to apply these policy instruments. So that's just a very quick run through on these externality and public goods instruments. The first 4 dimensions are the fundamental ones. But then there are a number of additional design instruments. Now, we said that there's actually 3 possibilities at dimension 1. Very quickly, I just want to run through the other 2. So, looking at research and innovation, you may recall that some of the policy instrument venues just said research and development, R&D. But that's not a policy instrument. That's an outcome. We still have to decide how are we going to deliver that outcome, move from our substantive policy goal to a concrete action.